And hello. What's up? You're hanging with the beast in his cave. And I hope you like that intro. That's a song I always really dug by a band named Social Burn called Everyone. Real funny thing about that song is the way I discovered it. How does one discover music, right? It all depends on the person. It was, I believe it was on a PlayStation 2 video game, an MLB video game, or PS3, I don't remember, but whatever the case may be, I remember hearing that and kind of digging it, wondering why a band would put music on a video game soundtrack. But hey, man, look, wherever you can get your music out, I mean, it's always good to do. And we've seen now that like times have changed. You've seen so many bands that kind of put their mark on video games, whether they're somewhat mega famous or whether not. I mean, after Guitar Hero, right, Rockstar and all that stuff, everything kind of changed. So, yeah, man, I always thought that was a badass song. It sounded, I guess, if you want to call it very 90s, whatever the case may be. But moving on, today's episode is all about Nevermind verse 10. That's right. Nirvana's Nevermind versus Pearl Jam's 10. So if there was going to be a title fight of the 90s for two bands, it would definitely, for two albums at least, from two bands, it would definitely be these two. And it's funny, man. I knew these albums rather well over time. I mean, just from living through the 90s and whatnot and hearing them over and over and over and over the motherfucker again and again. You never seem to get old, especially living through the times when radio play used to play nothing more than Jeremy Black, Alive, or Smells Like Teen Spirit. What was the other one they used to play over and over and over again? Forgot the song off Nevermind that they used to play. Come As You Are was one of them, and there was another one they used to play over and over and over again. In Bloom, right? Plus, not mentioning watching the videos for these, watching the live album, the live concerts from various different venues and such. So I thought I knew them really well, man. And it's funny? We fast forward to modern times a couple years back. There's this wonderful movie called is it Into the Furnace with Christian Bale? I know I mentioned this before. Takes place in Pennsylvania. Actually, I believe it's Out of the Furnace. I always fuck that up. Out of the Furnace, rather. Great film, man. It's got a great cast. Christian Bale, Casey Affleck, Sam Shepard, the great Willem Dafoe, the great Woody Harrelson, etc. Forrest Whitaker. And Pearl Jam's release is really prominent in the movie, throughout the movie. It's very similar and eerie to the new Batman with Something in the Way by Nirvana. It's like that's the only song you really hear throughout the film. It's almost like it's a ballad throughout the movie. If you don't hear the lyrics, you just hear maybe the intro or like the outer music. But it's very similar. That both those two movies had that going on for them. And again, we rewind them to the two albums that they came from. Obviously, release coming from Pearl Jam, and of course, Something in the Way from Nevermind. And it's funny, as kids or young adolescents, whatever you want to call us, we used to laugh at the lyrics to Something in the Way because we didn't understand what the fuck they were talking about in the song. But that didn't mean we didn't dig it. And yeah, man, I thought I knew these albums really well. I think I knew Nevermind a lot better than I did 10, only because I have both the albums, but I think that obviously the influence came from my older brother, where Nirvana was the album we played a lot more. And again, I always go back to the same thing where, you know, I always say how it was weird for me because I always kind of favored Bleach a little bit more than Nevermind. And I think because I found in Bleach, as I've said before, that it was a lot more raw, a lot more not polished, a lot more not pretty, didn't have all the bells and whistles and trinkets and what have you. And it was a very like hardcore from the soul, very punk. Um, and it was gritty. That's something that I really enjoyed a lot about it. But recently to prepare for this podcast um, correctly, I went back and I just basically listened to both albums, and kind of went through them hardcore as I was training, which is really funny because it's something that usually when I lift, man, I want to hear some stuff that I really know or that I haven't heard in a long time. But this being the case, I am, man. I think you know what, I got the time. Let me just go back and kind of hit it, and that's exactly what I did. I went back and listened to both albums. No joke. I started with Nevermind. I think because I got on a kick hearing the song on a plane. Not I was on a plane, but hearing the song off Nirvana's 10. I'm sorry, Nirvana's sacrilegious of me to fuck up the names. Hearing Nirvana's song on a plane off of 10. I did it again. Off of Nevermind. That's why I'm drinking this fucking black coffee, because my brain is fucked today. And that's where I started it, man. I figured, let me start with Nevermind. I'm on this kick. Let me go through it. And I didn't listen to all the songs, obviously, that I knew really well. Like I didn't go with "Smells Like Teen Spirit" because I've heard the song 75,000 fucking times. I feel like Beetlejuice when he says, "I've seen The Exorcist 100 and whatever thousand times, and it keeps getting funny every time I see it." That's how I feel with "Smells Like Teen Spirit." I've heard that song 75,000 fucking times, man, and it's obviously it gets better, over and over the more you listen to it. But I went through other songs too. I didn't listen to. I did. I gotta admit, I did listen to Something in the Way, obviously, because recently just seeing the new Batman and hearing that song. I went back and listened to that. I had to listen to Polly, which is a phenomenal song. In Bloom, I didn't listen to because I've heard the song 1,000 fucking times. I don't know how many more times I can listen to the goddamn song. But it was one of my favorite songs when the album first came out. But that being said, Stay Away, I listened to Breed, I've always really dug. Come As You Are, again, I've heard that song 1,000 fucking times. I don't know how many more times I can hear that song. And Lithium, Territorial Pissings, I went back and listened to. Drain You, phenomenal song. So, lo and behold, I went and listened. And, to tell you the truth, it is by far one of the best albums of the 90s. I mean, hands down. It's got everything there. And I think if you listen to it singularly and not go through the rest of the Nirvana catalog, predominantly not going, especially I should say, not going backwards and listening to Bleach, you'll find that this is singularly one of the most phenomenal albums of the 90s. And therefore, it stands out. Obviously, it just stands out by itself. If you were to be very knowledgeable in music and you heard this after you heard Bleach, you would definitely dig this album, but you would also see the differences between the two. And again, this is a more cleaned up, polished version. This is not obviously. This is much more prettier than Bleach, and I mean that in a good sense. And even if you go on to their last album, well, their last studio album for that matter, In Utero, I think that In Utero by far is a phenomenal album, but is not as good as these first two. And it gets more polished as time goes on. The band gets more famous. But it's weird because they actually had a phenomenal set when they did the album live and unplugged at MTV. I mean, that's another. If you listen to that singularly, it stands alone as a phenomenal album. And then you could even listen to From the Muddy Banks of the Wishkah, which is phenomenal. Johnny Boy, what's up, son? How are you doing? We're live, by the way. Um, but getting back to this, I went back and kind of compared the two as best I can. Now, comparing the two, man, is really hard to do because obviously, as my older brother just recently said to me during Mother's Day, he goes, "That's a good thing to do to compare them." He goes, "But it's also kind of difficult. Two different bands, two different sounds. Coming from the same place in Seattle, obviously, and it is two different bands, two different sounds. I mean, that's the way I've always felt about it. And again, I think when I say that, what I mean is." Nirvana, was more punk, was straight up more punk, more just like they could have really cut their teeth in New York City and CBGB had they would have been there and gotten off really good. Because if you look at a lot of their early work, you'll see that that's what they were kind of sounding towards a lot of the time. And they really would have been, I think, phenomenally received had they would have been on the New York City circuit at a lot of these underground clubs doing this punk thing, this hardcore thing. I think that's what it sounded like, especially in Bleach, man. Now we're carrying over to Nevermind. There are a couple of songs on there that I guess you could kind of say you can hear similar to Bleach. Not all of them, but I think like a few of them, which goes to show how the band was able to transcend. Because on this album, again, you'll see, if you'll notice Something in the Way, you'll notice Polly, which kind of breaks away from their obviously obvious other ways that they sounded, where it was kind of punk, kind of hardcore, kind of metal. They really, kind of cut back on that with those two songs, I thought. Even for the most part, if you listen to In Bloom kind of reminds me of a little bit of a Alice in Chains type song because the way it's slowed down, yet still somewhat heavy with those heavy riffs and whatnot. So it just goes to show how in tune this band was. And again, I've said this many times, is that there are only a few bands that I know that have the ability to do that, to kind of go and change directions in terms of the speed of the music, the sound of the music, the instruments, the sound, whatever you want to consider it all together. And lo and behold, they're some of my favorite groups of all time. Obviously, the great Typo Negative, obviously, the great Stone Temple Pilots, Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden. Only a few can really do that. They can't really. They can really, I should say, just bounce back and forth. Now, the way it's received sometimes isn't always, I guess, positive for the group because, for the most part, people get so used to a certain sound that they kind of really want to just stick to. They want the group to kind of stick to what they already know, and that's not the way it goes. It's like that same old age-old silly argument how Metallica sold out once they cut their hair. Their first four albums were the best. Everything else was dog shit. Can't really go by that all the time, man. Just because a band wants to change their sound a little bit and experiment doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with it. Now, it may not always be their greatest hits. I mean, to be quite honest, when the great Chris Cornell had his solo album, and he kind of, I know he recorded it with Timbaland, which I still don't understand. I remember we were live at one of his shows. I forgot the fucking venue, man. Used to go back clubbing back there back in the day. In the city somewhere. I can't think of it. But anyway, he broke into that song from Timbaland, a couple, the beat that he recorded with Timbaland off that new album, and a couple of the beats, the intro beats, sounded straight up out of a rap song. And I didn't understand why the fuck Chris Cornell was going that route. I think that was just going a little too far and experimenting with stuff he really didn't have to, given that he's had so much success, being in Soundgarden, being singular as an act, and being an audio slave. And it just sounded to me, this is a pile of shit. I don't think that album was well received, nor did I think it was, obviously I could be wrong, but it was just my opinion, whatever the case may be. But getting back to Nevermind, it's funny how you forget how great an album really is, and you remember all the times you heard these songs playing, where you were in life. At least that's what I like to do. It's what music means to me, and what was going on. And again, I think that this is one of the albums that you can go through from top to bottom and not find anything wrong with it in terms of songs. And again, I will say it is very rare for bands to have that ability. And I'll mention these bands again. One of the bands that always sticks out in my mind that has this ability, at least on their first, I want to say, 5 albums of Stone Temple Pilots, Core, Purple, okay, Tiny Music Songs from the Vatican, Gift Shop 4, and Shangri-La Dee Da are perfection. There is not anything wrong with those songs. You can literally go from the first to the end and find that you can listen to them all the way through. This doesn't happen on many other albums, because you get bored, you don't like the song, you want to change shit up, whatever the case may be. But again, this is an album, Nevermind, that you can do that with. Okay, and you can also do that with a few other. Typo Negative always comes to mind. One of my favorite bands of all time. I think predominantly from if you go from Origin of the Feces to October Rust, Bloody Kisses, and let's see, Life is Killing Me, World Coming Down, even their last studio album, Dead Again. Again, you can go from start to finish and not have any problems with them, which is really rare. And I don't think it's a bad thing when you don't like a certain song by a band. That's okay. You don't have to like everything. You're not going to like everything, but it's cool. It's cool to kind of it's like it's rather rare to kind of listen to a band that has the ability to do that over and over again too. I mean, that's amazing. I always that always kind of stood out to me with a lot of bands, that they had this great, whatever you want to, I don't know how to coin the term really, but they were able to create this great piece of work, hence be Nevermind, where most songs on it were just amazing. If you think about it, the way the songs are set up, Smells Like Teen Spirit is their hit, right? That knocks you off your fucking feet right away. In Bloom brings you back down a little bit, kind of chill. Come As You Are, kind of mid-level. Cool riff, cool chorus. Then you go to Breed. Breed kind of sounds separate, different than anything you've heard off this album. Lithium. Okay, Lithium again. It's kind of in the same world as Breed. Polly slows it down, throws a curveball at you, and then you speed up with Territorial Pissings, of course, which is just a great title for a song. Then Drain You, which I think, again, phenomenal song off the album. Lounge Act, Stay Away, speeds things up again. On a Plane, again, another phenomenal song. And then it slows down with Something in the Way. The hidden track was Endless Nameless. Not a bad song at all. But just a great piece of work. You can't dispute that. There's no way to dispute that this is not a great piece of musical artistry, as I should say. And me personally, my favorite songs off this album, I think, like I said before, at one time it was In Bloom, but it's kind of changed. I got to go with On a Plane and Breed are definitely two of my favorite songs off that album. Okay. And of course, I don't have to go into how important this album was at the time. I mean, the sales were off the charts, man. And again, I hate to sound like a repetitive fuck, but when you grow up through this, obviously you can kind of get the idea for how famous an album is just by the radio play it was getting and the video play and the requests it was getting. One of the things that you find later on is, as years go by, that it still holds court in the current day. And I think that if an album has that ability, you really have to respect it. Now, you may not like it because there's a lot of albums that and a lot of groups that I couldn't give a flying fucking watermelon about. And, whoever considers it that their albums are standalone, that stand the test through time, I'm like, that album, that pile of shit music, fuck out of here. But I think that this is an album that everybody can agree on, especially who grew up in that time or the end of that time can definitely appreciate that by itself it stands alone. Another good thing about it, it's 49 minutes and 7 seconds long. Perfection. The longest song they got on there is Endless Nameless, 6 minutes 43 seconds. So gotta give my hats off to this album a lot. And just going by some of some of the facts about this album, produced by Butch Vig, obviously. It was released in September of '91. Recorded that May and June before. This was their really first major album. I know Bleach. I consider Bleach to be, but I think commercially, this was theirs. And of course, we all know how things worked out. This blew the motherfucker off of shit. Now, that being said, in my previous podcast, I was questioning why Nirvana was looked at as the kind of poster boy for the '90s. As I don't know who gave the title to them, and I don't know. I guess the narrative was that they gave them the title, but I always wondered why. And obviously, this album was so great, though, that I can sort of understand it to be devil's advocate. So, just looking again, going back to some of the numbers, do some analytics if you want. Analytics are important, but don't mean everything. Just look at Major League Baseball. It sold over 10 million albums in the United States, not to mention almost 2 million albums in the United Kingdom, as well as 1 million in Germany, 1 million in France, 1 million in Canada, and so many other countries. And it's still growing. So God knows where these numbers really are. It's on the top 100 list, I would think, of all time. If there's a time capsule for the '90s, obviously this goes on it. So yeah, it's hard. You don't even have to like Nirvana to respect it. Nirvana does not have to be your favorite band to respect it. Nirvana, you could think, is not by far one of the best bands out of the Big Four, but you have to respect this album. And I feel that way about 10, moving on to 10. You don't have to be a Pearl Jam fan to respect 10. 10, I think, stands alone, similar to Nirvana, Nevermind. Now, what's funny about 10 is 10 actually came out before Nevermind. Nevermind, again, September 24th, 1991. 10 came out August 27th, 1991. So they had a little bit of time before, not too much of time. But it's also amazing how things work out, right? I mean, 1991, you released these 2 studio albums, one being from Pearl Jam, their first studio album, and then a second from Nirvana, their second studio album, and both of them absolutely being fucking kick-ass, crushing. I mean, what are the odds? They say that things come together for a reason. I'm a big believer in that, man. Nothing just happens for any old reason. This is just kind of the way the music fate is. Now, obviously, I went back and I listened to 10 again. And, no doubt it's a phenomenal album. We all know that. I don't think I'd be silly to say that anything else. Now, I'm not the biggest Pearl Jam fan. I like Pearl Jam. This, to me, is their best album, or one of their best albums. I don't care for their later work, because to me, it got to be a little too flimsy, a little too fucking Grateful Dead-ish. But I call it like I see it, and I respect the hell out of this band, because I think as a band, they're tight as a motherfucker. I mean, musical talent-wise, it doesn't get any better than this. It really doesn't. And what I also like about them is Eddie Vedder is phenomenal by himself as a singular act. He puts together a lot of good music. He knows music really well. He plays music really well. He has a good ear for it. I wonder if Kurt Cobain had to live past 27, what it would have sounded like for him to do a an album by himself, or with a different group, what have you, similar to what Eddie Vedder has done, similar to what the great late Scott Weiland had done. It's always similar to what Chris Cornell had done too. It would have been very interesting to hear that. But looking at 10, obviously, again, even the way the album is arranged is perfection. Once is one of my favorite songs by them. Even Flow is probably, again, Even Flow is Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit. People could say Jeremy, I say Even Flow. Alive, again, Why Go, fucking phenomenal. Black, one of the greatest slowed down songs. Jeremy. So you got 6 kick-ass songs in a row on that album. Okay, I mean they come at you, boom, 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 and that's one thing I loved about this album, is that it was right in your face. It was right there. They didn't pull any punches. They showed their ability to slow things down a bit with certain songs. Um, as the album goes on, you have Oceans, Porch, Garden, and Deep, and then of course Release. Release is just, I think Release could be one of their most phenomenal songs. 9 minutes long. It's a phenomenal tune. You have this wonderful guitar, the singular guitar in the beginning, this wonderful sound, and then the way Vedder's voice kind of comes in over the music and kind of just carries for a bit, kind of leading you up to that great big explosion of the lyrics. It's just a phenomenal way it was put together. So this is a perfect album. Again, I think this is. I don't appreciate certain, like I didn't appreciate Porch and Garden and Deep so much as I do the other songs, but those first 6 or 7 songs are just phenomenal. And again, it's very rare for a band to have the ability to just kind of staple these wonderful tunes one after the other, after the other, after the other. And it just makes for a tremendous sound. Now, going back to the 90s once more, it used to be that on the radio, when all these songs were playing at the same time from a certain band, they would have the ability to have multiple songs playing on the radio at one time, especially on various stations. So you could turn on Z100 and hear Jeremy, and then you could turn on 92.3 and either hear Black or Alive, because those 2 songs were playing a lot. Even Flow as well. And again, going back to Even Flow, as I said, that's Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit. Those are their tunes, man. Like, that's where the band, I think, was at the most pure. Although, I will say this. There are 2 songs from Pearl Jam that I feel, 3, that are at their most pure. And in my opinion, it's Even Flow, it's Release, and it's one of my favorite songs, Yellow Ledbetter. I think those 3 songs really catapult them into the stratosphere. And for Nirvana, obviously it was Smells Like Teen Spirit. And to me, it was also Negative Creep and Floyd the Barber. Those 3 songs by each group put them in a different area. Um, Now, again, this album came out before. And another phenomenal thing about it is 53 minutes and 20 seconds. So it really goes really fast, especially when you listen to the whole album together without any breaks. You'll actually kind of wonder how be amazed at how fast it really moves. But that's just I feel like I'm being invaded. There's like a helicopter or a plane. That sounds more like a helicopter. They're looking for Godzilla or some shit. It's really amazing when you think about it. They're able to cut things down to 53 seconds. Imagine all the edited versions of whatnot. I see that there were bonus tracks on other reissues, which is very interesting. Some of these songs I've never heard of. But again, when I say a great combination of musical talent, I'm talking about Vedder, McCready, Gossard, Ammon. That's very rare. And that talent or that, you know, amount of talent per band is very rare. They also had a real big hand in producing this album, which is really interesting. And again, we're talking about guys, Eddie Vedder, who had a this background in music. Obviously, you know, singing with other groups and whatnot, or being being part of other groups as well. Or obviously they weren't as famous as Pearl Jam, but the experience I think was there, of course. Especially him being part of Temple of the Dog, teamed with Chris Cornell, and all those musicians in the band coming from other areas, whether it was Mother Love Bone, Mookie Blaylock, what have you, and as opposed to Nirvana, where I'm not really familiar with any other groups that Chris Novoselic, Kurt Cobain, or Dave Grohl a part of. I know Dave Grohl was not the original drummer, but you I think it's rather rare that it's rare for both bands. Like I said, for Pearl Jam, with the amount of talent they had now, for Nirvana, they only really had three guys in that band. I mean, obviously, you consider the great Pat Smear, the guitarist who would travel around with them and appear in several songs and albums. Very good guitarist, by the way. He used to wear those real funky high heels. We used to laugh at that shit back in the day. But for three guys, a drum, a bass, and a guitar, they were able to kick ass, man. Now, comparing this to, as I said before, Nevermind, Nirvana had more of a punk sound. Pearl Jam didn't really have that. Pearl Jam, I think, was straight up, I guess if you want to call it grunge, I guess if you want to call it Seattle, I think that they were more Seattle than Nirvana in sound, because, like I said, Nirvana had that punk sound. That punk sound, of course. Not that what I mean by that is the punk sound just didn't obviously generate here in New York, but it was all over. But New York has this really rich history of punk music, whether it's the Ramones and so many other friggin' punk hardcore groups. That's the way it kind of reminded me of Nirvana. But Pearl Jam didn't really have that sound. They had a pure sound, or more, I guess you want to say, grunge 90s sound, especially with this album. And that's one thing I found amazing too. Again, this album would go into that pile of greatest albums of all time, greatest albums from a 90s time capsule. Now, looking at some numbers, just again, some more analytics if you want, because I'm a stat guy, but just looking at it and trying to be as objective as one can be. This album sold 13 million albums in the United States. And again, this doesn't take into consideration Australia and Canada and the UK, where I'm sure it sold even more. So both these albums were very, very even in on the charts in sales. And the good thing about both of them is they had a lot of songs that were on the charts at that time. Obviously, from Pearl Jam, Alive, Even Flow, Jeremy Oceans. What this doesn't, what I'm looking at doesn't show, was Black was also up there as well. Going back to Nevermind, like we said before, Smells Like Teen Spirit, obviously, Lithium, and several other songs from that album that were singles, I should say, off there. But that's only what commercially you only heard. When you listen to the whole album, there were so many other songs that you wondered why didn't get picked to be singles off that. Now, the one thing they have in common too is, like we said, they're both bands coming out of Seattle. Both had humongous success with these in terms of sales. Both had their albums up on the U.S. Billboard high charted in numbers. This is another album that really doesn't get old. And these are the grassroots of both bands. More for Pearl Jam than it is for Nirvana, because of course Bleach came before Nevermind. And again, if you were living during that time, the radio play, the video play, especially for Jeremy, it was all over the place, man. You couldn't go anywhere without. I mean, the radios played that and that song out so many fucking times. I mean, I used to hear it 3 times a day, and they also played out "Smells Like Teen Spirit" without a doubt. You would definitely hear it 3 to 4 times a day, especially when they had people calling in, voting, and whatnot. So it was a crazy time and a wonderful time for both of these groups. And obviously we know the history from about Pearl Jam, that they're still going strong today. Now, again, comparing these two, which is the better album? Well, that's kind of hard to say because they're two totally different sounds. I think that Pearl Jam doesn't sound punk at all, according to this album. They sound more, I want to say, like I said, more grunge, a little more tighter to in a grunge extent, if that makes sense, as opposed to Nirvana's sounding more punk yet grunge on Nevermind. But I think that was something that both bands were able to kind of get inside, was where they were going with their sound. Now, through Pearl Jam's history, their music has changed, which is never a bad thing. Like I said, I don't care for some of the newer stuff that they were doing because to me, it got to be a little too popish. But that doesn't mean that it's automatically bad. I cared for their earlier work, and even after 10, I cared for. I liked a couple songs off Verse. I liked some songs off of other songs that they released. Obviously, Yellow Ledbetter, and then Nothing Man. They're a group that was always kind of, I guess, experimenting with how they sounded, and obviously they've changed the sound of their music as time has gone on, and that's always an interesting thing to look at. Now, again, that doesn't mean you have to love it. Doesn't mean you have to. You can love it or hate it. It is what it is. But I think that I always wonder, had Nirvana been around for the long run, would their music of sound have changed? I don't really know. I mean, who knows? When you look back at In Utero had a little bit of Nevermind on there. I mean, there are some phenomenal songs. Obviously, Heart Shaped Box, Rate Me, which is one of their most phenomenal songs. They couldn't sing that today, obviously, and so on and so forth. You wonder where groups who aren't around anymore would have sounded like years after they had been around. And there are bands that withheld their own original sound as time went on. I mentioned Typo Negative before. I'll mention them again. They have their sound in every one of their albums. They weren't changing, which is hence be why I love them, because it's very rare that a band can keep to that sound. Although I will say they did experiment on Dead Again, with September Sun. That was very, it didn't sound like Typo Negative at first. But it's very rare that a band can do that. And I think when we look back at these two albums singularly, obviously we have to hold them up next to each other and kind of compare and contrast them. It's hard for me to say which one is better, because to be pretty fair, I don't really do the big four thing. I mean, I know the big four in Seattle, but I always considered 5 bands to be the 5 main bands of this grunge era, or just to say that get that grunge title or whatever, alternative title or whatever. Stone Temple Pilots I always threw in there. Obviously, they're not from Seattle; they're from Los Angeles, but I always kind of held together Stone Temple Pilots, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Nirvana, and Alice in Chains. And for me, from my own personal opinion, Stone Temple Pilots was first. Alice in Chains was second. Soundgarden was third. Nirvana and Pearl Jam are kind of tied for me at 4, or whatever you want to consider it. That was just my opinion. It's just, you know, It's just the way my ear caught the music, the way I feel about a lot of the songs and stuff like that. I just felt that was the proper list to put them in just for me. I came up with that last week, by the way, as I was thinking about these two albums. But it's really hard to say which two of these is better because, again, two different sounds, two different bands. One coming from a more punk area, the other one coming from a more grunge area. Yet both bands kind of stemming from the same place, Seattle, which goes to show you how rich with music history, how rich with talent Seattle was. I mean, when you think about it, Seattle having those four bands, and not to mention the other wonderful groups they had. What are the odds of that? What are the odds that Jimi Hendrix was from there? I mean, it's crazy, man. It's crazy. Again, I think it's an anomaly. It's something that's so rare in this world that we'll never see that again. It's sort of like when you come back to when you go back in time on the musical timeline and you think about certain areas that spawned so many wonderful acts and so much type of music. Detroit, Chicago, the doo-wop era in New York and Brooklyn. You really have to look back at it with wide eyes and just be amazed. The British invasion, right? Look at all that came from the British invasion. You have to be amazed. Laurel Canyon, California. How many wonderful groups came out of these different areas? It's amazing and just so rich in history, and you can't help but look at it with wide eyes as you go over the map. And I mean that for this episode with Seattle. The first thing you think of when you think of Seattle is not the Seattle Supersonics. As much as I love Sean Kemp and Gary Payton, it's obviously music and rain. Music and rain. It sure shit ain't the fucking Seahawks. Fuck the Seahawks. Or the Mariners. Or the Kraken. It's a cool name for a hockey team, though. I'm happy to see that they have a hockey team now that has to do with the squid monster that was made famous from two movies, which was Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest, and of course the original Clash of the Titans. On that term of Pirates of the Caribbean, long live Johnny Depp. That's all I'm going to say. But getting back, if you want to compare these two in numbers, it's really hard to do because they both sold millions of albums. They're both in the category of two of the best albums of all time. They're both in the category of two of the greatest albums of the 90s. So it's really hard to do that. I think the only way you can compare these is to just kind of really break them down as much as possible. And the best way to do it is, like we said, the sound. Two different sounds, two different bands. That's the only way to do it. And the awards that they won for both albums go on and on and on. The hits that came from both albums go on and on and on. Another way we can kind of compare it is just longevity. Nirvana's not even together anymore, nor have they been for quite a while, but this album goes on to always be in the conversation. And look at modern times, like we started the podcast with. We said they're still being used, these songs. I mean, let's face it. What I was told, Something in a Way is like number one on the Apple or some shit like that. Downloads, became re-famous again, much like Release did on Out of the Furnace. So that's something that always makes me happy when I see these wonderful songs still being used in commercials, more movies and TV shows and stuff like that. I think that's always really important. But even comparing them a little more, like let's compare the bands. And again, I just think that they're two different bands. I mean, you can compare lead singers. Whose voice did you like better? Did you like Cobain better? Did you like Vedder better? Well, good thing about them was they were both guitarists. They both played music. I think Eddie Vedder was the better musician. Voice-wise, I think it's kind of up in the air because they had two totally different sounding voices. Obviously, they're both distinct. You can't misplace them. Talent-wise, as far as it goes for the other band members, I have, my arrow has to point towards Pearl Jam. I mean, Jeff Ament, Stone Gossard, and McCready, man. I mean, it's not even funny, and I'm not dissing, Chris Novoselic, and I'm not dissing Dave Grohl, because Dave Grohl's a phenomenal musician, whether it's playing the drums or whether it's being the lead singer guitarist of the Foo Fighters. He's a phenomenal talent, but I think again, just you have to kind of point towards Pearl Jam with this. Just having that great camaraderie in that band. Again, it's very rare. So, and a good thing is too. I mean, look, you got fans on both sides, man. You got fans on both sides of this argument, whatever. But I think that if you're a music lover like I am, you appreciate both albums big time, and you appreciate the bands behind them. And like I said before, obviously, like for me, Pearl Jam, this is their best album. This is when they sounded their most original, I think. For Nirvana, I think that commercially, this was the one that just blew out, obviously. But I always kind of went back to more towards Bleach, because it was kind of a little bit more raw, a little bit more kick ass. But anyway, gonna wrap this up. Hope you enjoyed comparison between these two albums. From time to time, I'll compare other albums from other bands. Doesn't necessarily have to always, be two bands from Seattle, but just being from the 90s, that's what usually happens, because so much music came out from music from bands from the 90s. But hit me up Instagram, hit me up Facebook. Let me know how you feel. Comment, whatever. Shoot me a message, whether you tell me to go hang myself or whatever, or you tell me to, here's a snow cone. Either or is all good. Hang in with the beast, and I am going to go back into my cave and hibernate for a bit, because I'm shot. Later.